Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we are chatting. It's a hot topic. We're chatting about conflict because that's something that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to be in, but most of the time we have to be in it to resolve things. So Dana is with me, and Dana is, oh my gosh, I totally lost what your actual whole thing is. So tell people who you are. I know you deal with conflict.
Yeah. So I call myself a conflict engagement specialist, which just means that I've studied and work in conflict in a variety of different ways. So I work with individuals and as a coach, as they figure out how they want to deal with conflict in a more constructive way. I work with groups who are having conflict and trying to figure out a better way to move forward as a group. I'm an author. I've written 2 books. My most recent book came out this year, Conflict is an Opportunity, which is my kind of basic feeling about it, is that conflict itself often feels like the worst thing and like we want to avoid it. And if it happens, we've failed. But in fact, conflict comes up because something matters. So it's really an opportunity for us to figure out what matters to people, to us and to other people, and then to say, okay, so now that we understand this, we have this on the table, what might it look like to move forward in a way that makes life better? So we're not getting stuck kind of simmering in anger for years, which can happen at the home or in the workplace. Things can just last forever. And then people can start creating patterns of kind of avoiding it, going around it. And then we lose a lot of our life energy in that way. And building up the ability to be present with the uncomfortable moment when you realize that there's some kind of a conflict coming up, and being curious in that moment about the other person, even if suddenly you really don't care about them, to take a step back and say, okay, let me try this again here. What's going on with them? What's going on with me? Have I let them know? So that the conversation doesn't turn into 2 sides of a wall, but instead turns out to be around a table. In the middle of the table, there's the question that's between us. What are we trying to figure out? What haven't we figured out yet? What do we need to know to get there?
Yeah, I love that. So how did you get into this? Because like you said, a lot of people avoid this. So why would you want to make that your career if people are avoiding this?
Yeah. Well, I got into it because at one point in my life, there were so many conflicts and I just didn't know how to deal with them. They were really impacting my life. And I thought there's got to be a better way. And a friend of mine dragged me to a workshop with Marshall Rosenberg, who was the founder of Nonviolent Communication. And I went reluctantly because I'm not a big, workshop fan, although I give a lot of workshops now. And I had, in the moment of listening to him, I suddenly understood something that I just somehow had internally never really understood before. And I realized it literally doesn't have to be that way. And I got more and more curious. I started studying. I eventually went and got a master's degree, because what I found, to your question, is when people build their ability to be present, to be curious, things unfold so differently. Life gets so much better that then it's a real relief. And people are like, thank God. That relationship has been difficult for years, or we've had that problem at work forever, or this thing keeps coming up. And now I realize that I can step through it. So there's a kind of wonderfulness in the moment when you realize that the conflict was trying to tell you something. If you really listen to it and you do the work of listening to the other person as well, you realize that that's just information. And the more you're able to take that on board and then act according to the information, the more likely you are that life will get better.
Wow. You wouldn't think that conflict would make life better, but the way you just phrased it, when you're looking at it and you're changing your perspective, that's huge.
Yeah. It really is. And we're so conflict avoidant. Either we're kind of battling or we're avoiding, typically.
100%.
Yeah. And, so many of us. And then if we avoid it, stuff doesn't get taken care of. If we just come in with guns blazing, we end up kind of escalating things or making things more violent. And those aren't the only 2 ways, is what I eventually realized. And then I got really curious about, okay, given that, most of us never learned anything else about conflict except like avoid it or go at it, what might it look like for us, for more of us to start practicing something else? Because it's really just what we practice. We learned it maybe, in our family or in our community or in our school. And we oftentimes, because we learned it so young, we don't question it. It's just like, well, that's how it is, or that's how I am. But our conflict habits are not us. They're just what we've done the most. And if we change what we do, then we eventually change our habits. And then it's like a huge relief because you're not stuck with thinking like, oh, I always avoid conflict. That's just how I am. But then you can really take on a different mindset, a different approach to the whole thing. And it feels much more possible.
I love that. You talk about mindset because a mindset shift is necessary when you're looking at conflict, because because we learn how we were brought up by our parents on how to deal with conflict. Either we avoid it, like I said, or we engage in it and it makes matters worse. So talk about that mindset shift.
Yeah. So I think about mindset as a primary thing because a mindset has to do with what we pay attention to. And if what we pay attention to is, for example, attack or defense or our opinion about what's wrong with the other person, then that's how we're framing the whole thing. They're impossible. They keep attacking me. I need to defend myself. And then that's a repetitive kind of mindset that is looking in one particular direction. And what's great about the mindset is that it's adaptable. We have power over what we pay attention to. We might have a habit of paying attention to things that aren't helping, but we can notice that and be like, oh, wow, I'm like right back there with the attack and defense. Woo, let me just take a step back. What would happen here if I really step into a curious mindset? And this is not like some kind of a fake curiosity, but a real curiosity that's like, all right, doesn't feel easy, but what's going on here? What's up with this other person? What are they thinking? What am I actually thinking? What do I really care about? So that the mindset is something that we can practice on a daily basis. We can notice, what do I typically pay attention to? How do I typically kind of frame what's going on? How is that working for me? If it's not working, what would it look like to start to consciously say, every time I notice, ooh, I'm falling into a habit that's not helping me, that's all right. You don't need to attack yourself about it. You can just say, there's that habit. Okay. I'm going to get more and more knowledgeable about that habit every time I fall into it so that I can also step out of it. I can say, oh, there's my avoidance habit. All right. What if I do something else right now? What if I take a minute and instead of avoiding it, just get clear for myself, for example, on what really matters to me here? And what might it sound like if I expressed it in a way that wasn't about blaming the other person, but was really about naming what it is that I'm looking for, that I need, or that I want in this situation? Then we can move toward we can strengthen our ability to step into the kind of mindset we want to. So it's not like we have to say, I'm going to adopt a conflict resolution method and I'm going to do it right. But it's really, for me, it's just, I'm going to notice what I'm doing. I'm going to notice what the impact of that is. And then I'm going to consider, what might it look like if I asked myself some questions whenever I found myself falling into that. So what am I paying attention to? What are the decisions that are mine to make? What kind of request might I make if I made a request instead of a demand or an attack? These kind of questions. And this is what this recent book is oriented toward, this really action-based thing. 20 questions that you can always kind of come back to and ask yourself when you find yourself getting stuck. Because conflict's not easy. It's not like we'll say, oh, I'm going to now do it properly. It's hard. We get emotional, and so it's helpful to have some kind of a framework for yourself that you can say, okay, I know that I tend to freak out whenever this particular thing happens. Next time it happens, I'm going to have a plan. I'm going to ask myself in that moment, okay, first of all, I'm going to take a deep breath and exhale so that I can kind of get my nervous system calmed down. And then ask myself some questions that might help me, like, what is it that I really care about here? Have I expressed that? Do I know what the other person really cares about? So oftentimes in conflict, we get stuck up on this level of like strategy. We should do this. No, we should do this. You should do this. No, you should do this. And that's where we get in conflict. underneath the strategies is this level of what matters. And that's where there's a lot of possibility. So if I know something matters to me and I know something matters to you, then the question can move away from what should we do to what might it look like if we like found a way forward that integrated what you care about and what I care about. Then we have a question between us.
Yeah. So I have two things. One is I love the fact that you say recognize that when that conflict comes up and you're like starts to react to it, you recognize it like, oh, there's that habit again.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of ourselves beat ourselves up when that happens.
Yeah.
I was brought up in a family of rage and regret. We raged and then we regret what we said to each other. And it's so hard to change that mindset, especially when it's learned mindset.
Yeah.
So as parents, how do we take that, what you're saying, take it to our kids and say, okay, this is how we deal with conflict, or give them some practical tips? Because I think it's important that we start at the lower level instead of waiting until we're 50, 60, 70, 40, 30, 20s, and we're trying to deal with conflict and we don't have any skills whatsoever to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I so appreciate that because, like you say, we learn it early and then it gets hardened and it feels really difficult to change. And so kids automatically know, for example, when something doesn't feel right, they know. And so if they're given a little framework that's like, hey, you know what? It feels like there's something going on between us right now. Let's sit down and talk this through. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to let you know what I'm thinking. And I want to know what matters to you and tell you what matters to me. So that becomes where the attention is rather than like, hey, stop it.
Yeah.
You get back in your room or whatever it is that, it might temporarily work, but it teaches the kids that force is the way out of conflict, force and defense. And if they learn instead that, okay, it's possible, even if it's hard, even if it's a difficult thing that's been happening, it's possible for us to sit down and say, all right, let's take a second. First of all, let's take a breath. Let's exhale so you can help their own bodies to help them with deep breaths and say, all right, let's talk this out. What's going on? What are you thinking? Here's what I'm thinking. So that becomes a space that they know is possible, where you can be with them and talk things through. And then if they know that that's possible with you, they'll know it's possible with other people as well.
So what happens if when you're trying these mindset shift, but the person that you're having the conflict with doesn't want to hear anything that you have to say, doesn't want to, they don't have that same mindset as you? How do you deal with that? Because that's going to be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so important because we don't need to all be on the same page with some kind of a method. But what matters is that everybody in a conflict is there for a reason. They're there because something matters to them. So if you come at a person in a conflict with attack or defense or strategies, they're going to react to that. If you approach them with real curiosity about what's going on with them and that you want to better understand what matters to them and why that matters, what's going on, then they're much more likely to be engaged, much more likely to say, well, this and this matters. They might describe it as a strategy. And then you can say, okay, so what does that help with? If we did it that way, what would be the good outcome from that? So that you can also, rather than insisting that they have some kind of a framework or anything particular way of dealing with conflict, you just get super curious. Like, okay, can you tell me more about what's the most important part of that for you? And then if they describe it as a strategy, say, tell me what that helps with most for you. And eventually you'll get down to the level of like, well, then I'm able to, have more autonomy, or I can relax because I'm exhausted. And you'll start to get to like, okay, so yeah, you're exhausted and you need some space. Then you've shifted the conversation to a different level. And if they know that you're really there with some curiosity, even if it's hard, and I'm not saying this is easy, but it gets easier the more you do it. And if they hear that you are there, you're willing and interested in hearing what is really up with them, eventually they're much more likely to be willing to listen to you. People tend to go to the level that you engage them on. And at first, especially if you have a history of kind of conflictual, pain, people might not trust it. And that's okay. The more that you practice your own curiosity and your own willingness to be like, okay, yeah, I think there's something here I don't get yet. Can you tell me more about it again? I want to make sure I understand. what's going on. I want to make sure also that I express myself in a way that, makes sense. So if we approach with aggression, we're going to get aggression. If we approach with curiosity, we're much more likely to get some curiosity. And the more that we develop, and this is another really practical thing, developing the ability to, if someone comes at you with attack, to not focus primarily on that attack, but build up your own ability to say, what's behind that? What is it that they care about? And this is not about being a martyr, rolling over, giving up, whatever. This is about developing your own strength of mind so that you're not only in reaction to other people's emotional states or attack modalities, but you can say like, "Ooh, that was hard to hear."
Yeah.
And for yourself, that was hard to hear. At the same time, what is it that's happening with this person? So there's two different topics. There's how we communicate, and then there's what's going on. And eventually, if it's someone in a long-term relationship, you might be like, hey, I have a really hard time staying with the situation when you yell at me. When stuff comes up, can we think about how we're handling it? Because I just find myself shutting down. And what works for you, so that that can become a conversation. When stuff comes up, what helps you be there in the way you want to be there? And so that we normalize conflict, and we normalize having a plan for conflict, which we almost never do. We start projects, we jump into all kinds of things with no plan for how we'll deal with conflict. And we can have plans, and it's not about assuming that we're going to fail. It's about knowing that everything's always changing and things will come up that will be confusing. And so we need to also understand that we can say like, hey, I'm kind of confused right now about what's happening, and I want to better understand, what's going on. Can we sit down for a second?
Yeah, I'd love that, because I was going to ask you about the way we approach people too, because when you approach people and you're like in the moment and you're angry and you're like, people are going to have their backs up because they're not going to do it. I remember I have really bad anxiety because I've been hit too many times and from behind in car accidents. So my husband likes to get very close to another car, and I would tell him, don't get this close. And he would like just start yelling at me, like, you're judging my driving and everything. And then I finally sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to approach it differently. And I told him, I'm like, look, it's not your driving. It's the way I feel. It's my anxiety going through the roof because I am so, it's the way I feel. It's nothing about your driving. It's just like, can you please just give space? And once I told him that, he was like, no problem. We did a cross-country trip last year, went from North Carolina to California. And I had essential oils that like calming oils, and he would know when a big city was coming up. Most of the time it was good, but when a big city was coming up, he says, get your oils out, it's going to be heavy traffic. And we like joked about it, but I don't think in the past I would have been able to take that cross country trip with him if I hadn't had that conversation with him, and finally made it so that he understood what I was saying and not like attacking and saying, oh, stop, please. Oh my gosh. All this stuff, all these reactions and emotions that you're going through that you don't realize that other people are thinking you're criticizing them when actually it's your emotions yourself.
Yeah, that's a great example. It's exactly what happens. We have an underlying need. So you had a need, sounds like, for safety and being able to stay calm. Your husband has his own natural need for contributing well to the situation and doing a good job driving. And if you don't approach it on the level of like you did there, I get really afraid because this happened, and I really want to, what helps me is to have this and this in place. Then you invite the other person to help make your life better. Yeah. As opposed to people very quickly think they're being attacked. And oftentimes we feel like, I told you that I'd hate it when you get close. But that's different than talking from always beginning with yourself. I feel fear. I really want to feel safe. This is what helps me. Is that something we could do?
Yep, 100%. Now we need to take a brief commercial break, but we will be right back.
The threats women face today are unparalleled and even more dangerous than ever before. 1 in 3 women globally has been the victim of an assault. Women are terrified, and they are looking for answers.
In the book, Street Smart Safety for Women, we draw on our experiences, both personal and professional, to provide those answers. It's by women, for women. Street Smart Safety for Women is available wherever books are sold.
In a world full of chaos, she chose to anchor her story in hope. Through storms and silence, she found strength. And now, she's inviting you to do the same. This isn't just a book, it's a lifeline. For every woman who's ever felt unseen, your healing begins here. Anchored in Hope, available now.
And we are back with Dana talking about conflict. So first of all, I think I should have started the show off by saying, what is conflict? Because a lot of people think conflict may be just a little argument, or there may be these big blown out, or maybe wars or something like that. So what is conflict actually?
So I think everybody's going to have their own definition of conflict. For me, I think conflict is, for yourself when something rises up where there's an unproductive tension that initially, and that tension can become productive. And so it's this state where there's some kind of a tension that arises between people, or between people in a structure, let's say, a system. So I think there's a lot of different definitions, and I think people know for themselves what feels like conflict. And normally that's what I find.
So what was your main purpose to actually start studying and start diving into and writing the books? For people to heal, or for people to negotiate conflict in a healthier way than what society deems possible?
I think both of those things happen when people shift how they change with conflict. So what I really care about is helping people build up their own ability to step into difficult situations. There's so much chaos and conflict and really destructive conflict going on, and it happens on so many levels. And the more we build up, first of all, our internal ability to stay with ourselves, and like you mentioned before, not beat our own self up about things, but rather have internal curiosity, like, wow, why do I keep doing that? What else might I do? And then, like you did with your husband, in our interpersonal things, if we notice there's some kind of a violence or a conflict that's coming up, get curious about that. What might it look like if we found a way forward? Move it out to the community. What's happening in the communities? What's in place now that keeps these conflicts, these negative conflicts happening? What might it look like to shift that? So I think my overall goal would be that there would be a huge reduction in violence in the world. I think it's not inevitable. And oftentimes we assume it is. We assume war is inevitable. We assume that other kinds of violence is inevitable. But violence is just a strategy. It's not a human characteristic. And so it doesn't have to be this way. And we can shift it. And like you said before, we are often not taught anything consciously. Things get passed down generationally. And so what would it look like if there was a much, much broader area where people were thinking about conflict consciously, talking with their kids about it, the schools were talking about it? What might shift? How might we stop wasting our human lives in violence and war and unproductive conflicts and bad meetings? It goes through so many levels.
So many levels.
Yeah.
Because let's talk about keeping our cool in stressful situations, because you talk about mindset, and you talked about how you change your mindset so you can keep your cool, but not necessarily the person coming at you may not have that same mindset. So how do you kind of reduce that? For example, road rage, because you hear more and more stories on the news about people with road rage. So how can we just kind of de-escalate that conflict
if someone else is in the grip of a road rage? Yeah. So there you're in a situation where there's no speaking. So first of all, don't escalate it. Don't provoke further escalation of whatever their issue is. We don't know what's going on. And that's often the case in conflict. We don't know what's going on. So in those kind of situations where you don't know what's happening, all you can do is pay attention to yourself. And one really powerful way is to use, like I mentioned, breath. So if you find yourself kind of getting caught up in reactive to someone else's road rage, for example, to not let them be in control of your own response. And to do that, you can take some really slow breaths, exhale really slowly, and that gets your nervous system to calm down. Consciously shift your attention to, okay, this person is freaking out over in that car. I don't know what's up with them. I'm going to shift my attention away. I'm going to shift my attention to having ease in my body. I'm going to drive. Maybe I'll move back. I'm just going to get out of that, whatever they're trying to involve me in system wise. They're creating something. We don't know what it is. Don't let other people control your response. And that's, easier said than done. But the more you practice consciousness around what happens to me when someone else is in road rage, what can I consciously practice instead? that kind of practice becomes something you can do in low stakes moments. So, if you're suddenly on the highway and road rage, it's too late to practice.
Yeah.
And that's why, like you asked me before, why I got into this. That's why I write these books, and that's why I work with people, is that we can practice in advance, and then we can avoid all kinds of unnecessary, pain and suffering, because we can respond in ways that are constructive. And this is not about, being a saint or not having emotion, because emotion is part of how we think. We can still be furious. I can say, I am so furious about this because here's what really matters to me. This is this, and it's not so that the emotion can be part of it, but I don't have to use the emotion as an attack.
Yeah, that's so true. So how do we go about, I talked about it earlier about when I was with my husband, but how do we go about expressing our own needs without alienating others? Because a lot of times people think, oh, you're all about yourself. You're so selfish. Why are you telling me this? This is what you need, but you're not looking at what I need. You're not hearing me. I get that a lot. You're not hearing what I'm saying. I'm like, yes, I'm hearing you, but this is what I'm saying back to you. So how do we do that without alienating others?
Yeah. So starting with yourself and not expressing your needs in terms of the other person. So if I say, I need you to stop driving so fast, that's not a need, that's a strategy. But if you say, like you did, I need to feel safe, and I have a really hard time feeling safe when the cars are really close because of my history, then I'm talking about my experience. I'm not putting it on you. So that then you're invited into the situation rather than it being about the other person. So if I say, for example, in a work situation, like, oh my God, you're such a control freak. You never let me do anything. Then I've dumped it on you. I'd attacked you. I feel like I've said my needs, but I haven't given you anything about my needs. I've only said what I think is wrong with you.
Yep.
But if I instead start with myself and say, hey, I want to talk about how our work situation is going, our collaboration's going. I'm finding that I really want more autonomy in the situation. And I'm wondering what that might look like, what you're thinking about that. What are you thinking in relationship to that, about how our collaboration is going? So people, if they're like, you didn't hear me, or I don't want to hear about you, it's usually because you have framed something as being about them. What's wrong with them, or what they should do, as opposed to this deeper level of what matters to you. And then if they say you didn't hear me, to be really curious, like, oh, okay, so tell me, what is the most important thing for you in this? If they say that you didn't hear them, they think you didn't hear them. And so then to pull up the curiosity, which is not failure. It's just like, oh, okay, so what's up? Tell me. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, though, is when people, because they feel like when people say, you're not hearing me, it's almost like they're finding fault in something you're saying. And it's hard for people to accept that and say, maybe, well, tell me why you think I'm not hearing you, and frame it in the form of a question back that way. Because I think a lot of people, that's so hard because they feel like it's an attack on them as well. So we got to take that mindset. Like mindset keeps coming back to mindset. How we have to shift it out of it. It's not attacking you. It's how they feel.
Yeah. And, people express things oftentimes with attack, but even if they say it badly, there's something they care about. So if someone says, you didn't hear me, think about the kind of question you ask. Because if I say, why do you think I didn't hear you? Then that just gets them into, oh, because you never listened to me. And you come, what? But if you say, oh, okay, so what's important to you? So that you direct the attention not to what's wrong with you or them, but what they seem to be saying, which is that there's something that I want to tell you that I think you haven't understood or hasn't gotten through. Okay, tell me.
Yep, that's true. Because I will talk about reframing mindset here. I used to be a teacher, and I had a principal. My daughter was going through a lot of health issues, and I went to the principal, and the principal is always one that if you went to her and you were like, this is a problem, what are you going to do about it? Her back was up automatically, and she was already shut down. But I learned with her that I walked into her office one day and I had a conversation with her, and I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. What can we do together to make it better? And she responded to that because she didn't want to find anybody finding fault in anything that she did. And so I learned that through her, but I wish there was more ways of more people came with signs like, hey, this is what you need to avoid when talking, or this is how you should talk to them, because you have to learn those strategies as well.
Yeah. So notice what you did there is that rather than putting it on telling the person what they should do, you put a question between you.
Huh.
And that's always useful. So that noticing if you plan in advance what you're going to say to somebody, check in. Am I telling them what to do? Am I saying what's wrong with them? Or am I trying to name what the question is between us? And if I don't really know, what do I need to know from them that I don't know? So that you can say, hey, here's the thing I'm thinking about. Here's the issue that I'm having. I feel like this is the thing we're trying to deal with, but I'm not sure if I'm missing information. Is there more things that you're thinking about this? What do you think we need to be doing to try to figure this out?
I love that 100%, because it's so hard, because we tend to repeat, and when people come at us aggressively, most of the time we either give that aggressiveness back or we completely shut down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard.
But the good thing is that the more you practice a different thing, the easier it is to access it when you're stressed out. And that's why it's really helpful to practice it when you're not stressed out. When you're at home, when you're talking with the people, if you live with people, just to notice where am I placing my attention? Where am I focusing the attention of a conversation? What's the impact of that? What else might I try? And this is not about like saying things right or doing the right thing, but just noticing, am I putting something on them? Am I telling them what to do? Or am I putting a question between us and inviting them into that question?
Now, that is so true. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room in the United States, all the conflict going on right now. As a citizen, how do we deal with that? Because that's hard, because you have families that are being like, they're on different sides of the political spectrum. You have people that are different sides. They believe in some things, they believe in other things. And it's hard when you sit down and you want to have a conversation, because you want to listen to their point of view, but you also want to get your points across too, as well, to have an intellectual conversation, not a shouting match at each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So a really powerful thing to practice is acknowledgement. And it's often, it's one of the most powerful things you can do in a conflict. And it's often the first thing we jump right over. Somebody says something and we come back at like, no, but you don't get it. Or no.
Yeah.
And then we start telling them what we think. And then acknowledgement is, if you think of it kind of physically, it's like holding two things together and letting them be both there at the same time. So that I can, if I'm having a conversation with someone who is a very different, belief system or whatever than me, I can acknowledge what I understand their position or their belief to be. Okay, it sounds like you're thinking this and this is really important to you. Is that right? And checking in with them so they can feel, yeah. And then they know that you heard them. And this is not about like, okay, so you think that this makes sense? You can't be sarcastic. It has to be real curiosity that says like, okay, so it sounds like for you, this is what's making sense. Yeah. Okay. And at the same time, which is a helpful phrase, at the same time, I'm thinking of this. So I wonder what the question is, that the two things that we're thinking brings into the space, because it seems like we have really different, things we're thinking about this. What are the things within that topic that really matter to you? So again, getting down from the level of strategy to the level of what matters. So coming in with curiosity and acknowledgement. Okay, it sounds like this matters to you, and this is what you're thinking. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, and here's what I'm thinking. And it sounds like we're really on, kind of like opposite ends of this thing here. Can you talk more about what really matters for you inside of that? And so if you come with that kind of real curiosity, that's not about pushing them away, because that doesn't work. It just absolutely does not work to convince somebody about something. But you can connect to them as human people. You can be together in the space that acknowledges that, yeah, we're really in a time where there's a lot of tension being held, and we're inside of that. We're inside of it in families oftentimes, and we're in the community. And it's not easy, but the more we can stay connected as humans, the more we can get through it without really dividing in ways that get very dangerous.
So how can we keep conflict from affecting our obviously conflict affects our mental health, but our physical health, because a lot of times we hold in stuff like we avoid the conflict, and we end up getting, you see all these health conditions that come out because people are avoiding, because they're just like swallowing their feelings, and they're either taking and eating, doing food, drugs, whatever they use to fill that, so they don't have to deal with the avoidance of it. And then there's the other part where people are so rageful that they take it out on everyone. So how do we get those tools that we can actually say, okay, we got to start at step one. It's not going to be an overnight mind shift. But how do we start, and how do we continually progress and not regress?
Yeah. Yeah. What you're saying is, I think at the heart of it is that we start with ourselves, and we start recognizing that it's a process of shifting. And it's not that we're bad now. It's that we can notice what's happening in us that doesn't feel good, that doesn't feel like it's helping us or healthy. And some of the ways that I find are really helpful to do that are just to take, so one way is to take time when you find yourself really stressed out. Take time and breathing. And there's a practice actually comes from Buddhism called Tonglen, which I find really helpful, where rather than pushing away the emotion, you breathe it in, let it really fill you up, let it yourself feel the whole thing. And then as you exhale, let there be space, so that you're not constantly stuck inside this one, headspace, but you're also not pushing it away. So you breathe it in, like, oh, there's so much sadness, or there's so much anger, and I feel it. And then as I exhale, I'm kind of ventilating the situation. I'm not pushing away, I'm just ventilating. And I breathe it in again, so that eventually it becomes less of a constant heavy thing. So we can be present with whatever's happening without pushing it away. And the other thing that I find really helpful is to let your body help you. So like you're saying, if you notice that you're stuck in some kind of a constant repetition of an emotion or whatever it is, when you're in that space, how might you tend to sit? And then not acting it out, but just sitting, like really put yourself in that headspace, let's say, of sorrow or rage. And then just stay with it a little bit and notice, if I sit like that and I put myself in that headspace, what happens to my body? Maybe I kind of tighten my face or my chest. I stop breathing deeply. I'm like tightening up my jaw. Okay. Just staying with it, really noticing it, because it's not how you are. It's just what you've done. And then saying, all right, now I'm going to consciously shift into a mindset where I feel at ease, however that I might stand or sit when I feel like that. And then notice the difference. Notice how your face maybe opens, your chest maybe opens. And then the practice you can do is to shift between those two. So get into the heavy space, feel it, shift into the other space, feel what that feels like, and do it a couple times. So you notice that you have power over the mindset that you're choosing to stay in. And this is not about pushing away negative emotions at all, but noticing that it's there for a reason. Why is the sorrow there? Why is the anger there? So you can address what's at the heart of it, and you can move into the mindset that's going to help you address it by having curiosity, by having openness, by being willing to listen to yourself and other people about what matters.
Yeah, I love how you said, not as we are, but what we have done. I love how you said that, because a lot of times we beat ourselves up when we act in a way that we wish we hadn't reacted. And then we tend to beat ourselves up weeks after it happened, instead of, okay, it happened. Let's move on. Let's give ourselves grace. What can we learn from this situation? And what can we take moving forward that we've learned that we can apply to the next situation that comes up?
Yeah, and I think that also applies to, you mentioned before, with kids. That can be really powerful for kids. If you freak out and you respond in a way you didn't want to go back later and say, hey, the way I responded when we had that thing about the bike or whatever, it's really not how I want to respond, because what's important to me is that when things come up, we're able to talk about it. So can we try that again? Here's how I would have wanted to respond. Here's what I want you to know, and what I want to learn from you, hear from you, so that you model the fact that we're not perfect, and you model that we can step back from places that we didn't want to go, but that we went by habit. And then the kids can recognize, okay, it's also possible for them to say, like, I'm sorry, I wasn't like, I'm sorry, I freaked out last week. I just feel really stressed out at school and whatever. Then you can get into the conversation about what's going on, what they need. With your partners too. Yeah, I think that having those kind of practices for yourself is really effective because then you have a plan. If this comes up, and I know it's going to come up. Okay, what's my typical response? Is like to freak out or push back. Okay, even if you find yourself doing it, you can say, "Oh, wait, what's my plan?" My plan is to take a breath, feel my feet on the ground, ask a question, whatever it is. So I think the more things we can set up for ourselves, that we increase our own awareness of what we're doing, we increase our capacity to have a practice that we want to do. And the more we do that practice, the easier it gets and the more relief we feel. What I find is that the good thing is that it's not like the more you practice conflict, the worse and the more conflict there is. But it's the opposite, is that it's okay if a conflict comes up. And then it's like a relief. Then you just get really curious about what's going on. Absolutely. And the more we do it, the easier it gets and the more our relationships benefit and can flourish. Yeah. So one thing is, as you kind of practice yourself and maybe let's say you're getting ready for a difficult conversation, one really helpful thing can be to, first of all, identify what is it I care about. Make sure it's not a secret attack. Like, I really care about, he should stop being so impossible. Ooh, okay, let me get back. What is it that I need? Okay, I need more contribution. I need to be able to contribute myself or whatever it is. And then figure out what request you might make of the other person and differentiate a request from a demand. So a demand, if you demand something of the person, they have two options only. They can defy you or they can comply, which is like submissive. And if you make a request, it's all the things we've been talking about. It's like, hey, here's what matters to me. Here's what I'm looking for. Here's what I'm concerned about. Is this something you'd be willing to do? If they say no, they're not saying no to you. They're saying that doesn't work for me. Then you can say, oh, okay, what is it about that doesn't work? So it's like fishing for information in a good way. So you can make a request, consciously build a request in advance, make sure there's no sneaky attack in there, make sure that you're mindset wise not making a demand. And that can be a way for you to keep getting information and to keep connecting to the people in the conflict. Yeah. So you can, my website, which is up there, danacasperson.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. My book, my most recent book is Conflict is an Opportunity, 20 Fundamental Decisions for Navigating Difficult Times. And this is the one I was referencing where there's a lot of questions in there that you can go back. You can jump in at any point in the book to kind of give yourself something, a different way to look at things. And my other book is called, oh my God, I forgot the name of my other book. Oh my God, I actually forgot the name of my first book. It's the 17 Principles of Conflict Resolution. Yeah. And that first one is about kind of the principles that we can look at. So the first principle there, for example, is don't hear attack. And then there's an anti-principle. So it's principles and anti-principles. And the anti-principle is hear attack, avoid learning any other information.
Yeah.
And so that book is a good way to things that you can grab and hold of and just like, okay, I'm going to do this. The second book is a way to dive deeper and ask yourself more questions.
Yes.
Well, they're actually, I just remembered the name of my book. It's called Changing the Conversation. Changing the Conversation, 17 Principles of Conflict Resolution. They complement each other really well. First one is things you can grab hold of quickly. The second one is when you're working on the things that you grabbed hold of, things that can help you build up your mindset around that with these 20 questions in the second book, Conflict is an Opportunity. Yes, it's an opportunity to make life better. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.